once I chose to surrender, once I gave those things to God, the businesses exploded. The businesses have done far better. And I mean, the idea for the funds, the partnership with our investors, all of those things happened.
I just wanted to start off. You had a post today on Twitter about a practice that you've done for the last year that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to go into it. It was a wiser older man gave you this advice. Can you share a little bit about that and just go into it, what it was, what it is, and then what the outcome was for you?
Yeah, I was with a group of men out in California, and it was kind of a small group of guys. I met this gentleman. His name's Todd Peterson. Todd actually used to kick in the NFL. Just a great guy. He's an entrepreneur. He's just like the consummate loving elder now. But he's not that old. I mean, he's in his 50s. I think like mid to late 50s at this point. But he's just like this kind, generous, loving guy. And so I got to develop a relationship with him in this sort of group environment. And then afterwards, I said, "Hey, do you mind if I give you a call? I have a few questions I'd like to ask." He's like, "Sure, yeah, no problem." So we hopped on the phone probably a couple weeks later. And one of the questions I love to ask, older, wiser people is, if you were 35, 40, 30, whatever it is, age, what advice would you give yourself kind of 15, 20 years ago that would be most helpful to you today? And so I asked him that question, and he stopped and he was like, "Well, that's an easy one." I was like, "Great." He said, "I'd read the Bible every day. First thing I do is get up in the morning and read the Bible." I was like, "Yeah, yeah, sure. I read the Bible too." And he's like, "And then I do this exercise. Know, be, do. What should you know based on what you read? Who should you be based on what you read? And what should you do based on what you read?" And he said it, and I kind of was like, "Yeah, great. Fantastic. Any other advice that you'd give me?" And he was like, "Hey, did you not hear what I just told you?" Like, and he was super, I mean, he was very kind about it, but he was kind of a little bit like, "I just told you the singular thing that if I could go back and tell myself earlier to start doing this, it would change everything." And I was like, "Really? Okay. It's really that impactful." And he was like, "It's really that impactful." He's like, I exchange these with a handful of guys every day. And we've been doing it for a decade plus now. And it's changed all of our lives. And it's this unbelievable, both accountability and the intimacy that it creates in relationship with not only God, but with each other. And so I said, "Man, that's great." The next day I texted him, I said, "Okay, I tried to do it this morning and I feel like I'm stumbling through it. Could you send me yours?" Anyway, he sent me his for 2 or 3 days. I replied back with one and then another, and we've been texting each other every day for the last over 2.5 years now. And so, about a year ago, it was Easter, I felt compelled to just it had changed so much in my life. I mean, I can literally chart exactly when I started that and the trajectory of my life since then, 2.5 years ago. My marriage is almost infinitely better than it was 2.5 years ago. My sort of inner life, the transformation I've had with health, I mean, everything. And by the way, it's not like the quote unquote magic in it is not that you're going to do this thing and it's going to transform. It's just that getting in the word every day and taking it seriously and developing a deeper and deeper relationship where you can focus on one thing, Jesus, it transforms everything around you. And so it's a practice. I mean, look, church fathers going back for millennia now have advocated for practices, right? Sabbath,
Sure.
prayer. I mean, all these things, fasting. And so this is a practice that he has found and that he was passed down to him that I'm now passing down to other people. And so I send it now to 9 guys every morning. And I've been posting it to Twitter for the last year. I actually quit it today,
Yeah, I saw
just
that.
because I wanted to give people a full year view. So the entire Bible in a year, full year view of what does it look like to do it, to practice it for a year. That should be plenty of inspiration for people. And the whole idea was never for people to consume it, because that's not the point. The point is not to just read another sort of Bible study from somebody else. The point is to
Yep.
put it into practice. And so my hope is actually by ending it, that I encourage people, whoever were kind of lurking in the shadows and reading it and sort of enjoying it, which a bunch of people have now come out and said that they have. Um,
Yep.
my encouragement to all of them is just get a partner, start exchanging it daily. hold each other accountable, and see for yourself.
I was one of those lurkers. So and, I really enjoyed it. It is a practice, like you said. It's not something to just read. I mean, it's great reading and you can get a lot from it, but like you said, it's a practice that you need to actually do. And so you were using the one-year Bible. Is that is that what you've got it right there? One-year Bible. And then all of you, the 9 guys or whatever, would follow along. You'd have the daily reading, and that's what you would write on?
Yeah. Yeah, so the one-year Bible, the one that I've been doing now is, it's a passage from Old Testament, so I'm in Deuteronomy now, and then passage from, New Testament, Luke, and then a passage from Psalms, yeah, and a passage from Proverbs. And so it's
Yep,
every day, you get a little bit of taste of everything, and it's amazing too how, at least I found, you'll see common themes that I would never connect because of the way that you're reading them together. So it'll oftentimes be something from Deuteronomy, something from Luke, and something from Psalms will kind of all like have a connected theme through them. Sometimes it doesn't happen that way, but it's just whatever stands out, right? So I'll go through it, I'll highlight, I'll make notes, and then it's just whatever hits me. What should I know? Who should I be? What should I do? Write it down. It's not for, like I said, it's not for performance. It's not like that, God's happier with me or something because I did this. It's more of
right.
just being able to align my heart to reality, to the truth of who God is and who I am, which I forget often and need a lot of help with. So
Yeah, we all do. So I know that you influenced David Perel quite a bit. It sounds like I read something that that's all he reads now is the Bible. I mean, this is a guy that read widely and voraciously all kinds of stuff. Now he just focuses on the Bible. It sounds like you made a big influence on him.
yeah, David's become. I mean, truly, he's like a godfather to my kids. He goes to Disney with us every year. He plays hide and go seek. In fact, we try to convince him to move to Colombia because he could entertain our children. That's really the main purpose. But no, we love David. I think he's visited us, gosh, 5 or 6 times in the last year here in Colombia. My kids know him as Uncle David. But yeah, David interviewed me actually on his podcast. Boy, pushing probably 7 years ago now,
Wow.
and at the time, he grew up secular Jew in San Francisco. He was living in New York at the early in his career. Didn't know what he wanted to do. Hyper energetic, um, and so anyway, we had a great conversation. We hit it off, but I mean, like you and I are now on a podcast. And then it was
Yeah.
probably 2 or 3 weeks after that. He said, "Hey, can I come visit you in Colombia?" Sure. Yeah, happy to have you. So we came out to Colombia and we sat down, and I thought it was going to be what most people when they visit me in Colombia. It's like, hey, how can you help me get rich or become successful in business, right? And we talked about
Right.
that a little bit for like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. He goes, all right, here's the real reason why I'm here. I'm like, great. I didn't know there was an agenda. What's the real reason? He goes,
Mhm.
you're the first person I've ever met who's like a professing Christian.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Really? I'm the first person." He's like, "You're the first person I've ever, like, known, like, have gotten to really interact with who's a professing Christian." He's like, "I don't get it. Like, can you tell me, like, who is Jesus and what is this whole thing about?" And so we talked about mostly faith stuff, and I mean, he was very, challenging to me, right? I mean, if you know David, he is not taking any pat answer. He's gonna challenge everything. And I loved it, and we had just hit it off, and it was like there was no tension, there was no aggression or anything like that. It was just 2 people with very differing worldviews, very different perspectives on what was true, talking about truth. And
Right.
we talked for 7 straight hours, and it was beautiful. And then this, like, really interesting thing happened. He started to kind of like, we'd talk, I don't know, once every month or 2, and he'd kinda say, "Oh, well, I was reading about this, and this can't be true because of this," or "I have a problem with this." I'm like, "Great, let's talk about it." So we talk about it, and he kinda go away and research, and it was over the course of, like I said, like 6 years, and he had a lot of other influences other than me. But yeah, he came to faith last year, and it's been amazing to see his life and transformation. So
That's awesome. I love conversion stories. I think they're absolutely fascinating. In college, I read it was the Thomas Merton biography, The Seven-Story Man,
oh,
who he was a
yeah,
Catholic monk, made a huge impact on me. It
yeah.
was at the same time I was reading that Bible, the one-year Bible, and it just made a huge impact on me. I love these kind of conversion stories, like how somebody goes from leading this very worldly, decadent, materialistic life to then becoming, in Thomas Merton's case, a Catholic monk in a very strict order. So I
Yeah.
wanted to get back to like your conversion story. Like
Mm,
you grew up pretty hardcore atheist. I think the search for truth was always there. It sounded like for you, like you were deeply hungering for truth in college. It sounded like probably even before that. But talk to me a little bit about that, like this hunger for truth, trying to figure out like what the hell is going on here
yeah.
and figure things out.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember, I was 9 years old when I told my mom I didn't believe in God. And we went to church, kinda half the Sundays growing up. We went to a PCUSA church in Joplin, Missouri. Everyone kind of was you're in the Bible Belt there, right? It's like the cultural Christianity's in the water. But I didn't get it. I'm not going to blame anybody. I mean, we had a wonderful pastor. His name's Bill Chrisman. Growing up, actually, I set up a meeting. I can remember. I told my mom, "Hey, I need you to drive me to the church." I was like 14, probably maybe 15, and because I'd set up a meeting with the head pastor at the church, unbeknownst to my parents. You can imagine how terrifying I was as to raise me. I just do stuff like that. My mom's like, "Hey, is everything okay? Like, I'm driving you to the church to meet with the pastor. Like, everything all right? It's like,
Yeah,
what's
right.
going on?" And I said, "No, I have a whole bunch of faith questions." And so I had already determined at that point, that I didn't believe in God. I didn't want kind of anything to do with it. I didn't. The thing that I thought being a Christian is honestly what I see a lot of uh, people professing today who call themselves Christians. And it was just never interesting to me, which was there's a set of rules, and if you obey these rules, then you get favor in this life and the next. In order to be a good person, you need to follow the rules. Um, I'm not a rule follower. Like, I don't.
Mhm.
That's never been attractive to me. I don't. I hate rules. I hate structure. Um, that's just not my thing at all. And so I definitely rebelled against that. I rejected what I thought was Christianity, what I thought was following Jesus, and became, yeah, like I said, an atheist. So I met with Bill Chrisman, the pastor. He was super kind and generous to me. Sat with me for over an hour, and I pounded him with question after question. At that point, like, this is why I have so much empathy for people who think Christians are idiots, who even would listen to this and think that we're morons. Believe me, I was there.
Right.
Like, I was
Yeah.
there. But yeah, I left that meeting. I left the rest of high school, into college, into my 20s. And I just kind of started drifting more and more towards what I would call like hyper rationalism, towards new atheism, Dawkins, Hitchens,
Mhm.
Harris, that type of, especially at that time, that was kind of the heyday for the new atheist crew, and they were very bombastically aggressive towards anybody of faith, including Christians. Weirdly enough, Dawkins now calls himself a cultural Christian. Weirdest
Oh,
thing I've
really?
ever heard. Um, anyway, there's a whole transformation going on with a bunch of these guys now, but back then, they were all, if you believed in God, the sky fairy, all this stuff. So I adopted a lot of that language, and ultimately, what I grew up kind of knowing or thinking I knew, and the way I thought the world worked was that the more wealth and fame and power you could accrue, that would make up for everything. You could exert control, people would honor you, you'd live a good life with that. And so, really, the quest in my 20s was to accumulate as much as I could. And if I was God, I would have smited me, right? Like, I would have taken everything away. I would have said, look at that guy. That guy thinks he has it all figured out. He's arrogant. He's condescending. I'd take it all away from him.
Yeah.
I'm not God, thankfully, and the God who I now follow and worship is this loving, kind, generous, winsome God who instead of taking everything away and smiting me, gave me more than I could ever dream and hope for. And so I ended my 20s, you know, wealthier than I ever thought I'd be, more successful. We were 28th on the Inc. 500, invited to the White House to advise Obama on entrepreneurship policy. Started winning other awards, had a thriving business, my a beautiful wife who loved me, and it all tasted like crap. All tasted like crap. I mean, the best bottles of wine. I told my wife I didn't love her. I tried to retire and play golf for a while. That felt terrible. I'd wake up every day with sweaty palms, anxious. And so it was just, yeah, I was a mess. And it was about that time. In fact, I met a guy at the Inc. 500 conference in 2009, 2010. Maybe it was 2010 by the time it happened. So we were on the 2009 Inc. 500, and his name's John Garrett. He's still a dear friend of mine today, and I can remember him. I met him there, and we were out. And he's a big Texan. He's a Christian. He's like great personality. He's like, Brent, where do you stand with the Lord? And I'm like, what do you mean? Where do I stand with the Lord? Like, what are you talking about? You believe that stuff? I
Mhm.
started talking with him. I started learning more from him. He is this effervescent personality, relaxed, rested, loving, kind, loves his wife, loves his kids, great relationship with his coworkers. I'm like, wait a minute, what do you have that I don't? Because you clearly have something. And sure enough,
Mhm.
God started surrounding me with these people. They had something I didn't have. There was an aroma to their lives that I didn't have, and I didn't see it in any of the lives of the people who I admired, frankly, who were super successful.
Mhm.
And so that started the journey of God surrounding me. And they started, giving me books and kindly, some very directly correcting uh, my condescending personality, my lack of humility, my pride. And over time, I started really diving deep. So I mean, I behind me, there's this whole, these are all faith based books. I mean, I just read and read and read. I had to get to the bottom of it, and so I took seminary classes. I bought all the books that you could possibly buy on the historicity of the resurrection. I actually just got this monster. Hold on, let me see this book here. I haven't started reading it yet, but just got this baby,
Oh,
right, on
yeah.
the resurrection. It's like a murder weapon. But I,
Right.
I I love to read stuff like this because it's such a bolster to my faith of, hey, if I'm going to believe something, right? And this is the thing that I admire atheists actually far more than I do most agnostics, because at least atheists are going to say, hey, here's where I stand and
Right.
here's what I believe, and I think you're wrong. And it's like, great, now back it up. And that's when push came to shove with me, I was that way when I was an atheist. And a lot of people came to me and said, hey, back it up. And I couldn't back it up. Like, I hadn't thought about a lot of the questions, even though I took, philosophy classes and religion classes in college at a great university. Um, I had just not thought about a lot of the consequences of my faith, or my lack of faith, if you want to call it that. And so anyway, slowly but surely, I started reading more, and then ultimately, it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have. Ultimately, you have to surrender, right? And so
Yeah.
there was a moment
Yeah.
where I was like, I believe this is true. Like, I believe
Yeah.
that this is real, and my life's never been the same. I mean, it's been a clunky, difficult, not as far down the path journey as I thought I'd be at this point in terms of change, but there's been some miraculous change too. So just God's timing is perfect.
I've got a mentor who says, the whole idea of like it's the rich man getting into the kingdom of heaven, it's more difficult, than through an eye
Yeah.
of the needle. He
Yeah.
actually changes it. He's like, it's actually the intellectuals that have it's the intellectuals that are thinking and doubting and cynical that have the difficulty getting in. Like it's really difficult for heady people. But I think if you do the work, like you've given the example I've heard in the past of like C.S. Lewis, Mortimer Adler, um, what's the guy's name? The Chicago Tribune writer, Lee Strobel,
Oh, yeah, Lee
who
Strobel. Yeah.
wrote The Case for Christ. Basically,
Right.
these were all atheists, but actually dove in to disprove Christianity and actually ended up becoming believers,
For
which I
sure.
find fascinating.
Yeah, G.K. Chesterton has a great quote on this. He's like, a young atheist can never be too careful what he reads, for he might convert to the faith, right? I mean, it's like this
That's good.
this idea. I think there's a lot of people, and I certainly had this idea that it's like Christians were the uneducated ones. They were the ones who were
Oh,
not thoughtful. And by the way, there's a lot of Christians who I've met who, they grew up in the faith. It's a faith that they adopted, that they didn't really like, they didn't grind through and work through. And some of them truly are believers and just have been given this amazing faith, which is great. But some of them are not. Some of them, when they get tested and tried, I mean, this is the seed being scattered on different types of soil, right? It can easily be choked out. And I think this is where you see a lot of people who, all of a sudden, even some pastors who are all of a sudden like, oh, I read this argument against whatever part of the faith is, and it totally rocked my world, and I realized I don't believe anymore. And it's like, well, no, what you had before then was untested, right? And I think that's one of the
Right.
things that I'm really grateful for is because I came to faith as an adult and I wanted nothing to do with it. Like I feel like that there's really I haven't heard anything, and I would love if there's anybody who listens to this who wants to provide a challenge. I mean, I've read hundreds of books from atheists about the faith and about their critiques of the faith, and I feel pretty comfortable now that there's nothing that I could know, and I've seen way too much at this point. Like my
Mhm.
relationship with God, like I've seen miracles, I've seen things happen
Yeah.
that I have no way to explain them otherwise. But like that's where I feel like that rooted faith, that where the reliance upon the trust in, it's not this like wishy-washy, oh, I guess I'm just going to comfort myself and have faith, that I think I thought when I was an atheist that that's what being a Christian was. It was like, well, hope things work out, Pascal's wager, maybe a lot of people would kind of lean on that, which by the way, I think Pascal is incredible. And I think Pascal's wager is a great technique to get people's attention. But like true faith is not just being like, well, I'm going to take a holy insurance policy, right? It is a
Right.
daily walk of dying to self, of reliance upon the Lord. And the fruit that it produces is incredible. It's unlike anything else. The love that I experience now, like, I don't think I knew what love was until I became a believer. Like, because I had to experience the love of God. If I hadn't experienced the love of God, like, you can only give what you already have. Like I didn't love my wife in the same way before I was a
Yes.
believer. Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, just beautiful. I just rambled on, but it's beautiful.
No, I love it. I love to hear it. It just sounds like it was a slow progression of reading, being surrounded by believers. I like John Mark Comer, I think is the guy's name,
Yeah.
who he calls himself an apprentice to Christ. And I like to
Yes.
think of it that way, just like you are apprenticing to this guy that has influenced the world more than anybody else. I
Yes.
mean, you've made this point about like Abraham Lincoln studied Christ, Einstein studied Christ, Napoleon studied Christ. It's like there's a reason that we should probably delve into who he was. And, it's the C.S. Lewis idea of like he was either a liar, a lunatic, or he was what
The Lord.
what he said he was, or the
That's
Lord, right?
correct. Yeah. Yeah. I often I challenge people. If I say, hey, have you ever studied Jesus? And they're like, no, I've never studied Jesus.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's dumb. They're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, who do you study? And they're like, oh, I study all these greats in business. And I study all the, and I'm like, well, do you know who they studied? They studied Jesus. And I was like, and by the way, even if you put his divinity aside, right? Like let's just put that completely aside. And let's just say objectively, he's the greatest leader in the history of the world. He has the
Mhm.
most followers in the history of the world. Wouldn't you want to know how he did it? Like if you want followers of your own, if you want to build your own quote unquote brand, or if you want to lead people, he's the greatest leader. So why wouldn't you're going to study the leader who studied the leader that's actually the best leader? Why wouldn't you just go to directly the source and study the leader?
Right.
And oftentimes when I get people kind of cornered like that, it's usually at a dinner or something like that. People are like, all right, fine, I'll study Jesus. And I'm like, great. It's amazing what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I that was my experience. I completely discounted Christianity right off the bat and explored all these other wisdom traditions in depth. But it
And they have
wasn't
a lot
until
of
much
wisdom.
later. Oh, they do, for sure,
And they
for
have a lot
sure,
of wisdom.
and can
Absolutely.
impact your life quite a bit. But, it wasn't until later that I really got back into, like, reading and studying the Bible, and I like what, like, guys like Thomas Jefferson and Kevin Kelly. I don't know if you're familiar with
Oh, yeah.
Kevin Kelly, the guy that
Oh, yeah.
Wired magazine and Tim
Yep.
Ferriss has interviewed him. Fascinating guy. He just read the like the read of what Jesus said. You can like condense the study, and read what Jesus said and study that as an exercise. And I think that's great to challenge people that way. And um, I wanted to ask you though, like as you went through this kind of super gray nihilistic period of your life, and then you make this transition towards opening up towards studying, the Bible and being surrounded by Christians. Did was it sounded like that was a slow process. Once you made that transition, did business become did it take like a back seat and did it become more difficult? I think you asked Chris Powers that somehow did Christianity
Yeah.
make you less of an effective business person or entrepreneur?
How do you get started with stock investing? I've put together a course to teach you everything I wish I knew when I first started investing in stocks. Let's start at the beginning and ask, what is a stock? Let's zoom on in into what it's actually like to buy a stock. A few options are Charles Schwab, TD Ameritrade, Ally, E-Trade. Fortunately, you won't have to necessarily calculate all of these taxes yourself. I'll outline a few main ones to be aware of throughout your lifetime investing journey. As Warren Buffett says, your best investment is yourself. There's nothing that compares to it. By the end, you'll be savvier about stock investing and personal finance than the vast majority of people. Even if you're not a total beginner, I'm confident you'll get a lot out of the principles and strategies I outline, which we'll build on throughout. A link to the course is available in the description below. See you there.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, to be honest, when I um, surrendered my life and surrendered, including the businesses, to the Lord, and said, "Hey, all I have and all I am is yours." I mean, that's what's required. That's real faith, right? The Lord, it's His. It's His in the beginning, right? Like if you're a trillionaire and you gave everything away, you've given nothing to the Lord, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
all the Lord's anyway. But
Right.
it's interesting. God gives us free will for a reason, because without free will, there was no love, right? Love has to be able to choose. And so once I chose to surrender, once I gave those things to God, the businesses exploded. The businesses have done far better. And it's interesting because I've had the pleasure of having dinner with quite a few you know, successful, famous people, billionaires. And one of my favorite meals I've ever shared is with the Green family, with David Green and his sons in Oklahoma City. And I remember asking David this exact thing. I said, David, like, Hobby Lobby is this monster organization. Put the politics aside, put what people think aside. They're easy to lambast for some of their views. I'm just put all that aside. Just take for a second. This is a family that has deep convictions, loves the Lord, and that puts their money where their mouth is. They give away an unbelievable amount of money to support organizations that are helping the poor, the disenfranchised, women, children, orphans, the foreigner, all around the world. It's incredible. They take 50% of the cash flow of Hobby Lobby, and I'm not giving away anything that I think is confidential. They've written publicly about this, and now the entire Hobby Lobby organization is actually in a trust. They've given it all away. In
Mhm.
fact, David wrote a book called "Giving It All Away and Getting It All Back Again," which is
Oh,
just a beautiful kind of imagery of this. But politics aside, if you just look at what they do, I asked David. I said, "How do you compete? It's a highly competitive thing that they're doing. I mean, they're brick and mortar retail."
mhm.
And I said, "How did that work? I mean, you're giving 50% of your profits away. Like that's 50% less to reinvest. That's 50%. I mean, that's a big deal." And he said, "Yeah, we have double the margins of everyone else." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And he said, "Yeah, we have double the margins." And I remember this was probably, oh gosh, 6 or 7 years ago when I heard this, and I said, "When did your margins double?" And he was like, they doubled the year that we gave it all away to the Lord." And I
Huh.
was like, "Your margins doubled?" And he said, "Yeah, the day that the year literally that we decided to give 50% away, our margin doubled. So we actually had no net impact to the reinvestment of the business. And it's been that way ever since. And we have double the margins of all of our competitors." And I said, "How is that?" And he's like, "We don't know." He's like, "We have things that we do differently. We've got about 10 or 12 things that we know that we do differently than everyone else. We don't know which ones do what, and we don't know how the Lord works in this, but somehow the Lord provides, and the Lord honors the fact that He knows that it's His business. It's not our business. He knows that we need the resources to be able to accomplish certain things on behalf of the kingdom, and so He's blessed us." And I remember thinking to myself, I remember like, "Man, that is crazy." And sure enough, when I started, and in fact, this is still a process I'm actively doing. Is like the more that I have surrendered, the more that I've said, "Hey, This is not about building my kingdom, about my gain, about trying to, be the most, the wealthiest person, or however whatever you want to say, the most famous or most powerful or most well respected. The more that I can just say, hey, look, all of life's a gift. I'm not trying to gain anything. There's nothing that I can lose.
Yep.
I'm just going to try to hold it with open hands, which, by the way, I fail daily at doing. It's amazing how quickly your hands close when you take your eye off Jesus. And but I'm telling you, the way that that the business is just exploded. I mean, the idea for the funds, the partnership with our investors, all of those things happened, within a reasonable time right after I came to faith, and that it really solidified, and I really started to surrender to the business side, which that was a progression too. Like, it was not obvious to me in the beginning when sort of I gave myself and my life over to. It's just weird. It's like a muscle, like anything else. You've got to develop a taste for what does it feel to be surrendered, and what does it feel to be unsurrendered, to even understand what it is to give. And
Yeah.
so it took me a while to give the businesses and money. And I mean, I used to be obsessed. I could tell you down to the dollar what my cash balances were. I could tell you what our rates of return were. I could care, all that stuff. And the more that I open up my hands, the more I release that, the more God multiplies. And you don't do it again. This is where you get into prosperity gospel garbage. I'm not saying
Yes.
you
Yes.
you
Right.
you give it away so that you get your triple portion, or whatever kind of language that that usually happens, but that's not the purpose. If you do it for the wrong reasons, like, God wants our heart. So if you give with a heart posture of trying to get, God's not going to honor that. It's not going to work.
Right.
God just wants our heart. And so, yes, the business. I mean, has there been consequences that have been negative for the business that I'm a sort of an out Christian? Absolutely. Are there people who haven't sold to us in the the business, where the business of buying other businesses, who haven't sold with us? Absolutely. Are there people who have invested with us because they think I'm an idiot because I'm a Christian? Absolutely. But we also have a lot of people who um, aren't Christians, who are sellers to us and who are investors with us. And I love it because Jesus collided with the world. Like, Jesus didn't isolate himself with the religious elites. It's the exact opposite. So my whole view is, you don't have to be a Christian to invest with us. You don't have to be a Christian to be hired by us. You don't have to be a Christian to work with us. Like, we want all people. Now, we agree on certain values,
Mhm.
right? But you don't have to be a Christian to be in relationship with me. That'd be the anti-Jesus thing.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Was it difficult for you to become public with your beliefs? Like, you've really put yourself out there, and I really admire people like you and people that John Marsh that we talked about earlier, that are very open about their beliefs, and you're going to take shots. So I just wanted to hear, like, how that has been for you, that being as open as you are, and transparent and vulnerable. It's hard to do. I find it incredibly hard to do.
Yeah, I had a lot of trepidation. A mentor of mine and senior pastor at church, Dave Cover, who I've had a long-standing relationship. He was one of the people who helped bring me to faith originally. I remember having long conversations with him about being more known publicly as a Christian. And I remember thinking to myself, like, gosh, people are not going to like me. I, you know, if anything, I have a tendency to want to people please. And so I was like, oh man, this grates against all of my people pleasing. Um, and ultimately I said, look, either I believe or I don't. Either I'm going to be authentically me or I'm not. And if I'm going to be authentically me, if somebody asks me a question, I want to answer them truthfully. And if the true answer is because of this or that in the Bible, or because this is the way my belief system works, let the chips fall where they may. And I'm just going to trust that the Lord has me and will keep me and is my refuge. And what's interesting is the shots that I take are actually the best conversation starters. I've developed so many great relationships with people who have said something negative or um, condescending towards me in sort of a public setting that I've been professing my faith, and they start the best conversations. And by the way, it's not like they're like ultimately convert to following Jesus, or some have, but like many of them, it's like we're just friendly and we care about each other, and they think that I'm wrong and I think they're wrong, and that's okay. We can be wrong and still care for each other. So, the people who actually I probably struggle with the most publicly um, are the Christians that have a very different form of professing Christians, a very different form of belief than I do, and who dogpile on. Oftentimes when I'll say something on Twitter, about faith, you'll have people saying, "Oh, you're an idiot, you're wrong, blah blah," and all this stuff. And my answer to them is like, I totally get it because I said the same stuff about people, right? Like as an ardent atheist, I was also being bombastic about it. The people that are really struggling with this, the people who are like, well, actually, yes, and here's this crazy thing that I'm like, whoa, I don't believe that, but they're like trying to be on my side and trying to like go at people, and I'm having to like simmer them down and anyway, so I don't mind when people are opposed to me. It gives me anxiety when people who believe different things than me, who profess, and it's really hard for me outside. I mean, it's one of the things I talked about with David Perel. Like he was like, people will say that they're Christians and they don't believe in the divinity of Jesus. They'll say that they're Christians and they haven't been to church in 5 years. They'll say they're Christians and I mean, these are all the cultural Christians. Christianity's been now identified with Republican politics. Like it's all this other stuff. And by the way, shocker, people have been trying to use religion and tried to use Jesus for their own ends since the beginning, right? I mean, this
Right.
is nothing new. The problem is from the outside looking in, when you talk to somebody who's like, Christians are hateful, spiteful, people. I'm like, I've never met, literally in my entire life, I've never met somebody who has surrendered their life to the Lord, who is seeking humility on a daily basis, seeking to die to themselves, seeking to serve others, seeking to love the God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength, love their neighbor as themselves, who is hateful. I've literally
Right.
never met. Now, can we all have moments of anger and all this stuff? But I've never met somebody who's, you know, like quote unquote horrible person. Like I've never met them. Now I've met plenty of people who profess Christianity, who are people who I can't see Jesus' work in their life at all. And then you dig deeper and you ask them, well, okay, when was the last time you read the Bible? When was the last time you prayed? When was the last time you went to church? When was the last time, like, what do you actually believe? Well, it turns out they don't believe Jesus as Lord. They don't surrender to him as king. They don't read their Bible. They don't go to church. They don't pray. And it's like, why do you say you're a Christian? Oh, because I vote Republican. I'm like, I don't, that doesn't make somebody a follower of Jesus. As you said, John Mark Comer, and I just got finished reading his book. I should recommend it on Easter, called Practicing the Way. Especially when you pair it with Dallas Willard's book, Discipline of the Spirit, or Spirit of Discipline, excuse me. Amazing combination. But I just, as you said, he's like, following Jesus is about practice. It's about apprenticing under him, right? It's about learning a way of life that gives freedom. I mean, that is what being a Christian is. It's not even about, I mean, yes, we go to church because we're called to be a body of Christ. We're called to be united. We're called to be in community. But it's not like God's like, oh, well, you check that box, great. You went to church. Okay, now you're a Christian. Like that's not being a Christian. You know, there's plenty of people who go to church who aren't Christians.
If there's somebody listening to this and they're on the fence, they've been, struggling with issues of faith and things like that. Aside from the Bible, is there like, do you have like a couple go-to books that you recommend to people that you're like, read this and then get back with me?
Yeah, it's so interesting. It really depends on where they are.
Mhm.
So there's categories of people I've learned as I've kind of talked to people about this, and people ask me a lot of questions about my faith background, my faith journey, and um, there's kind of a group of people who grew up in the faith and who just kind of faded away from the faith, is what I would say. Right. So just kind of like they got busy, the cares of the world choked them out. They just kind of, now they're in their mid 30s, maybe in their 40s, and um, they're like, I want my kids to go to church. I want my kids to be good people. I've kind of fallen away. I still believe there's God, but I haven't prayed much in the last long time, whatever it might be. So for those people, you don't need to convince them that there's a God. You don't need to convince them of that. They need to break their worldview and that there's a supernatural world to this, and that the world is actually really upside down. I think all that stuff. Like you don't need to tell that. For them, they need to understand sort of what does it mean to really follow and practice following Jesus, and what is the fruit of that. And so books like Practicing the Way, books like Spirit of the Disciplines, Those are really good books for kind of getting people reignited. Another book that he's become a dear friend of mine. His name's David Gibson. He wrote a book
Oh, yeah.
called Living Life Backward. That's the best meditation on Ecclesiastes I've ever read. It just has so much wisdom, and it's like the smelling salts of life. That's another book that I really try to. Oh, there you
It's
go. Yeah,
oh,
look at
there it
you
is.
right there.
It's a good one.
So yeah, trying to get people just reconnected to feel, what does it feel like to be back in relationship with God, right? God's always been there. God's not distant.
Right.
If God's distant, you're the reason, right? So, but there's another group of people, and I would say, I didn't have this experience, so I have to be careful with how I speak about this, who have been hurt by the church. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who fit in this category. And man, my heart goes out. The stories I've heard are just heartbreaking. I can't imagine the pain and suffering of somebody who put their trust and faith in people who were leading them spiritually, who abused them either physically, sexually, emotionally. Spiritual abuse is a real thing. Um, Now, here's the problem. I told somebody the other day that, Gandhi's quote. He said, "I love Jesus. I really like Jesus. I just don't like the people who follow him." Right?
Right.
Um,
Mhm. Who
and
said
and I
that?
would say, I think it was Gandhi who said that.
Okay.
But yeah. So Christians are a terrible representation of Christ. You and me included, right? Like,
Right.
we are deeply flawed. I mean, we believe as part of our core belief system that we are depraved in many ways. That it left unredeemed, that we are capable of terrible things. And I think that that's obvious in this world, right? I mean, it doesn't take long. Read the news. The sin is about the only thing that we can all agree on, right? There's something
Yes.
terribly broken about this world. And that doesn't stop when you enter a church or you enter a religious organization. And unfortunately, people are messy, and when you get people together, whether they are followers of Jesus or not, there's going to be messiness. And so, with people who have been hurt by the church, there's some books about, it is, you know, there's all different kinds of like lines of reasoning. Does the church encourage certain types of abuse? Does the church encourage this or that? And my answer is, I think you can go back and read through the history that it is not that anything that Jesus said, it is not anything that's biblical that encourages abuse of any type. It is fallen people doing fallen things, and unfortunately, they were a victim of fallenness and brokenness of this world. And the problem is always sin, and the answer is always Jesus. And so there's a whole line of books. There's a great book called "Questioning Christianity." Let's see if I can find it. Oh, let's see up here, or "Confronting Christianity." My she's a wonderful author. Anyway, Confronting
Who's the
Christianity,
author?
McLaughlin. So she has. Let's see here. I'm gonna actually read through here. Rebecca is her first name,
Oh, yeah.
and so she's a great book. Came out a little while ago, so the chapters are: Aren't we better off without religion? Doesn't Christianity crutch diversity? Um, how can one say that there's only one true faith? Doesn't religion hinder morality? Doesn't religion cause violence? How can you take the Bible literally? Hasn't science disproved Christianity? Doesn't Christianity denigrate women? Isn't Christianity homophobic? Doesn't the Bible condone slavery? How could a loving God allow so much suffering? And how could a loving God send people to hell? Those are hard questions.
Yes. Right.
Boom, right? So this is like another one of those books that I think she does a really great job of approaching them in a pretty. I mean, there's a lot more deeper reading on each one of those subjects, but
Is
she does a
she I'm
really.
sorry to interrupt. Is she a
Yeah,
professor in Boston or somewhere? Do
yeah,
you know her
yeah,
background?
yeah.
Okay, I
She
saw
is.
her speak
Yeah.
this past summer. She spoke
Oh
in
yeah,
Columbus, and I got the chance to see her. She was amazing.
yeah. She's great. She's great. Yeah, we had her when she spoke in Columbia as well. We had her for dinner at my house, through a little dinner
Oh,
party,
cool.
and just really enjoyed getting to know her. But anyway, I think she. My point is, for somebody who's coming out of a broken relationship with the church, quote unquote. Or, I mean, this is also a good book for some people who have, their only exposure, like David Perel, to Christianity was watching Netflix, right? And seeing some, KKK, lily white, church service, and then people go out and murder black people or whatever the depiction is. There's a lot of these common common misconceptions. And by the way, I had all of these. Like I thought a lot of those things were true. Like a lot of those questions, I would come down the other side. So it took me a long time to really dig deep and to understand, okay, wait a minute, the Bible is not prescriptive in many ways, it's descriptive. So in the Old Testament, when it talks about all these people having lots of wives and terrible abuse and murder and rape, I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff. It's not that the Bible's saying, hey, you should go do these things. In fact, the exact opposite. It's saying, this is just what happened. And by the way, here's the consequences of what happened. And they're terrible consequences because all those things go against the grain of how the Lord created the universe. So, you know, anyway, there's a lot of misconceptions. My point is, it depends on if somebody's listening to this and they came out of, look, I don't think there's a God. I think science is the ultimate arbiter of truth. There's a whole line of things. I'd recommend a lot of Keller's books.
Yeah.
He has, two in particular. Let's see if I can grab 'em. Making Sense of God and Every Good Endeavor back here. See if I can grab them here real quick.
He's
So
got a
Making Sense of
good one
God.
on marriage too.
Oh my gosh, I'm actually reading his marriage. We have a 20s group that we're reading his marriage book with right now. So these two books, Making Sense of God and Every Good Endeavor, um, or not Every Good Endeavor. Shoot, that's the business one. Making Sense of God and The Reason for God is the other one that's really good. Somewhere back here. These are great for, and these were really impactful for me as an atheist to read about the how little. How much faith it takes to be an atheist. Let's put it that way. And I never framed it that way, but that's honestly what these books, provided. And so, yeah, there's a lot of books. Honestly, my DMs are open. I get questions all the time on Twitter about book recommendations and podcasts to listen to, and kind of just to help point people in the right direction. If anybody's listening to this and has a question, I'd be happy. Just DM me. I'd be happy to, be happy to connect. So.
I've got a guy that's in my Bible study that will listen to some of our podcasts. We Study Billionaires as our kind of flagship podcast, and it's all about studying Buffett and Munger. And he was just asking me, he's like, you know, it seems like Buffett and Munger are Christians. I don't know that they ever have said that publicly. Charlie unfortunately passed away, recently, but you've had the chance to have dinner with or a meal with both of them, break bread with both of them. I am really interested to hear your thoughts on like that experience for sure. But like, what were they just steeped in like Midwestern Christian values, and it's just a part of just who they are, or were they practicing Christians?
Yeah, look, I don't know ultimately where anybody stands.
Yeah.
I can tell you when I had meals with them, I actually asked them both this question, and neither of them were professing Christians at that time. So
Uh-huh.
that was 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah. And so, but yeah, look, I mean, I think there's the world we live in is a Christian world. The West is a Christian world. Like we have a world that's made around Christian values, whether or not you believe in Jesus or not, whether or not you think it's true and right. I mean, we are swimming in Christian waters, and so
Right.
yeah, a lot of the ideas. I mean, they've won out because they're true. And so, why do we say that people have dignity? It's because we're made in the image of God. Like and again, a lot of my atheist friends would argue that there's nothing special about humans. Like we are no different than animals. They would just say we're look, you know, uh, Scott Adams calls us moist robots, right? I mean, there's this idea. I mean, truly, and like I don't know how you get to meaning and beauty and morality outside of faith, and that's what honestly one of the things that scared me when I first started exploring these, and I was really offended, like angry when I was an atheist and I was given some of these books. I started reading through them, and I'd be challenged with that. And they'd be saying, look, there is no morality unless there's a moral lawgiver. Like, where does morality come from? Well, if you say that it just comes from you and I agreeing on what is moral, well, that's fine, but there's nothing sacrosanct about it. There's nothing that's just me and you having a social contract, right? So this is actually, in political theory, it's called social contract theory. It's just, look, we have a social contract, and you and I agree that like murdering people just doesn't work very well for our society. That doesn't mean it's wrong. So like when you judge somebody, or we say, "Oh my gosh, what a horrible person." Like there's no oughts, there's no shoulds. Like we're just random co-location of atoms. We randomly developed out of goo, right? And we're headed towards nothingness. We came out of nothingness. There's no actual underpinnings of morality. It's just what we create. We create meaning. There's actually no ultimate meaning. We just create meaning. That's fine, but that means there's no ultimate beauty, right? There's all these things that are these big challenges. And so what I would say is that getting back to Buffett and Munger, I mean, I share a lot of values with both of them. I think they are incredibly wise in many ways. But look, I mean, Munger's book that was written about is called Worldly Wisdom, right? I mean, it's the
Yeah,
book is
right.
about worldly wisdom. And I think that there's this idea of common grace, like God lets the rain and the sun come on the believers and the unbelievers alike, right? There's this idea that God showers down blessings. We have 10,000 blessings every day that we don't even realize. Um, it's wait until your toe hurts to realize you have a toe. Most of the mornings I don't wake up and say, man, thankfully, my toe works today, right? But I guarantee you have a huge problem with your toe and you're going to be aware of your toe. So, I would say is for both those guys, they were deeply steeped in Christian values. I think both of them came out of families that were faith driven,
Mhm.
but neither of them, I think, professed the faith.
Yeah, yeah. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. I've got a buddy of mine who he's got a couple kids in college, and he's encouraging them to use an SBA loan, buy a business, use an SBA loan, and come right out of college firing, with a business of their own. I wanted to, I know that you have done that. Like that's kind of a
Yep,
little bit how you got your start, used an SBA
correct.
loan. So can you talk to that, speak to like somebody who's young, who may be listening to this, who is interested in what you've done and wants to get started? Like what would be some of the
Yeah.
steps? What would you recommend? That kind of thing for a young person or middle-aged person who wants to do what you've done.
Yeah. So I got my start by I started a business and then I ended up buying a sort of adjacent business with an SBA loan, and that's how. Yeah, I mean that was ultimately how that was kind of foundational how I got started. It's all about risk reward. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to if you're a believer, what do you feel God's calling you to do? Do you have peace about it? Do you? I pray about there's a um, yeah. Anyway, we can talk about books and going down that path, but ultimately, if you decided that you want to get into business, you want to own a business, um, SBA can be a great route. It can be a higher interest rate. It's a 10-year fixed rate, which right now is pretty darn high. I haven't looked recently, but I think it's like 10 or 11%.
Mhm.
That's nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of interest you're gonna be paying, and there are prepayment penalties, I think, associated with it. So it's not like it's not free lunch, right? I mean, it's real, and you personally guarantee it. So if things go bad, and by the way, the visibility principle of like you only see winners. Winners are the ones that raise their hand and say, "Look at me, I'm a winner."
Right.
I've had 4 people in the last year, maybe a little longer than a year, 18 months, who have reached out who have declared bankruptcy as a result of, buying a business with an SBA loan. So, and there are a few people on Twitter who will talk about this, but most of the time oh, it's free money, it's easy money. Look, here's your interest rate, here's your multiple you pay, you do the math on it, you get to keep the difference. And by the way, all that's true. I mean, look, if you buy a business for 3 to 5 times multiple on free cash flow, which is kind of the standard what most small businesses go for, you're talking about what, a 33% to a 20% cash yield, right? Starting yield. If it's true owner earnings, just stick to your bones cash flow. You're paying 10, 11% in interest. You get to keep 10%. You get to keep
Right.
11%, right? I mean,
Yep.
like it's not complicated. The challenge is if you falter a little bit and the business goes down a little bit, you lose everything. Now, if you're right out of college and you don't have anything, I mean, the reality is the bankruptcy laws are there for a reason. And I mean, this is just, again, I'm just speaking to strict financial reality here. Nothing, sort of no moral judgment one way or the other. But look, if you don't have much and you can convince a bank to do an SBA loan and you've got the ability to negotiate it and to run it and you feel good about it, and it just doesn't work out, you declare bankruptcy and you're 24, 25, you'll be fine. Like you'll be fine, right? I mean, I think it's a little more complicated and I've seen this sad scenario play out where you've got 2 or 3 kids and you're in your 30s and you've got a good job, but you haven't saved much, and you take all of what you saved and you put it into an SBA loan, and turns out things are hard, and there's a reason. Most things are efficiently priced, is how I would say it. I remember when I first got into buying small companies, I was like, man, you could pay 3 times, and like this is incredible. Yeah, except for when you buy, decades of problems, and that 3 times quickly diminishes and turns into 8 times. It can get pretty dicey quick. So I would say is, you know, just generally, principle that I would have is from the time I started searching till the time that I bought a business, I'd budget 3 years of full time work. 3 years of full time work. Because over those 3 years, you're going to see a lot of stuff. Your tastes are going to change. You're going to dodge a lot of bullets. And a lot of the seeds you plant in year one are going to start flowering in year three. And so from the time that you first get introduced to a business till the time you close, usually for smaller companies is at least 4, 5, 6 months at least. So if you got to back up from that and say, okay, look, I start searching day one, I start making phone calls, I start, interacting with people who have access to these types of deals, I start calling seller or potential sellers. It's going to take a long time. You got to get a lot in the pipeline. And by the way, something's going to come along early and you're going to say, ooh, that looks attractive enough. I might do that. And then you're going to dig in a little bit. It's going to get real hairy. The more you dig in, the hairier it's going to get. Hopefully the deal falls apart and you don't get blind. Deal blindness is a real thing. And yeah, it just takes time. And the joke in the private equity world is the deal has to die 3 times before you can close it. And it's usually pretty true. I mean, usually there's about 3 times where somebody freaks out, something happens, the deal's called off, and then you got to kind of regather. And by the way, sometimes it never happens where you close, but deals that close, you got to regather, things, and it takes time. And if you have a time pressure and you're running out of money and you've got people who are breathing down your neck to do a deal, you just start getting incentives that are all off and wonky. And so it's complicated. I actually wrote a piece. It's on the permanent equity website called "How to Buy Your First Smaller Company." Recommend
Okay.
people read it. I go through a lot of these questions on there about, how should you think about financing? How should you think about geography? How should you think about industry? And then the funny thing is, most people are like, oh, I succeeded. I bought a business. Oh, that's just the starting line. You worked your
Mhm.
tail off for years to get to the starting line. Now you got to run the thing. That's really hard. So all that to say, it sounds like I'm being down on. I'm trying to be neutral on both sides. Like I don't want to. I don't want anybody to listen to this and say, oh man, I'd never thought about buying a small business. It sounds super easy. I can get rich quick. Like, whoa, 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 that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm also not saying on the other side that there's not gold in the hills. Absolutely gold in the hills. You just got to be ready to mine for it. And it's going to be pretty hairy. And so as long as you go into eyes wide open, yeah, go for it.
So you've done both. You've started your own company. You've bought existing companies. Looking back on things, like for a young person, is there one avenue or another that you would recommend? Like, is it easier to just
Man.
start like you own a fence building company, like
Yeah.
just start, a swimming pool company. Like, would you recommend like just starting your own business, or going the route that you're doing now, which is buying existing?
Yeah, it's all hard. I would say it's all hard. It depends on what you want to do. It depends on your skill set. Like if starting a fence builder from scratch is brutally difficult, and there's a reason why most fence builders are tiny. And there's a reason. I mean, but let me tell you, you'll learn a lot, and you'll put less capital at risk. So I would say is starting a company puts more time at risk. Buying a company puts more capital at risk. So so basically, the way to think about it is by buying something, you are buying a big chunk of time. Like if I wanted to build our portfolio that we have today, the portfolio that we built over, call it 15 years of doing this, it would take me hundreds of years to get them off the ground and to get them all up and going, right? So I've bought hundreds of years of progress in 15 years for,
Right.
a lot of capital, for $200 million of capital, right? Plus $1 million of
Mhm.
capital that we've invested. Actually, maybe more than that now. But anyway, so that's the way to think about it is like, if you know exactly what you want to do and there's no one else that you can go buy, build it. If you know exactly what you want to do and somebody else is willing to sell it to you and you can, take capital risk and exchange it for time risk and jump 15 years ahead, that's a good thing to think about doing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it's just case dependent, and people figure it out as they go along, right? I mean,
It's
in
all
your own
hard.
case, it doesn't sound like there was no playbook, right? You didn't have this playbook that you were following. It's just like
No.
you figure stuff out as you go along.
Yeah. Well, and what most people don't, I mean, I don't talk about this publicly a lot, but just to be honest, like my line is like, it's not a straight line from like, oh, Brent started a business, then bought a business, and then, rocket ship, right? It's like a very
Yeah.
squiggly, I invested in real estate. We bought some things that haven't worked. We've had to shut down a company now. Like, I invested in startups for a while, some very
Mhm.
successfully, most of them bombed. Like, I've kind of tasted and tried a lot of things. The thing that I knew that I could do, I thought better than a lot of people was, you know, offer a good long-term home to smaller companies and do it in the right way. Sort of, that's what I thought I could differentiate around, and that's what we've done. And I'm really grateful for it. I've watched, you know, maybe to back up, buying one business is brutally difficult. Buying a handful of businesses and having to step up out of that one business is like a lot harder than buying one business. And then
Mhm.
the third tier, which we're kind of going through now, is just build an organization that can repeatedly search for, negotiate, document, close, and operate businesses at scale. Balancing capital, balancing opportunities, balancing talent is a heck of a lot harder than the second level. It's just a heck of a lot harder than the first level. And the first level is brutally difficult. So I've watched,
Right.
there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm building a holdco. I'm like, fantastic. Where are you? And they're like, oh, I haven't acquired a business yet. I'm like, you should probably just try to buy one business. Like the best way to build a holdco is buy one business, operate that business successfully, get it under control, install great leadership, treat them really well, then try to go out and buy a second company and then try to operate that really well and install leader. I mean, that's it. Like that's the steps that you have to go down. I don't understand it. If I had been given 50 or $100 million when I was 2 years into this, I would have lost all the money. I would have lost everything because I would have made the worst decisions. I would have thrown money around. I wouldn't have known what's important, what's not important. Like the going slow aspect. Like if you ask me, like what is the single thing that's probably enabled our success is that we were capital constrained to start. By being capital constrained to start and to have to scrap and claw and fight and learn and go slow, it then allowed us to like create all these systems, create the processes, create culture, like get everything
Yeah.
gelled together to then go. And it's same thing. Like look at Berkshire. Berkshire was tiny, and Berkshire was, no one knew who Berkshire was until, gosh, Buffett was 55, probably,
Yep.
maybe
Yep.
60.
Mhm.
I mean, like that's like most people just don't understand. Like they look at somebody like a Buffett or Munger, since you mentioned them, and they say, "Oh, well, I want to build the next Berkshire." Great. They went at it. Berkshire is the result of compounding over like 70 years. Like it's 70 years of compounding. I mean, that in and of itself is just it's hard to wrap your head around. It's not like you can build a Berkshire in 20 years. I mean, you talk to like Mark Leonard who built Constellation Software. Like Constellation was nothing for the longest time, and then all of a sudden
Yep.
compounding takes over, and it's a
Yeah,
rocket
it's a
ship,
hockey
right?
stick. Yeah, right.
But people don't realize that like that portion's a really long time. Like it was
Mhm.
working, but it was nothing for a long time. So anyway,
Yeah, it's good stuff. Brent, this has been a lot of fun. There's so much I didn't even get to touch on. We didn't get to talk about Main Street Summit that's coming up and Capital Camp and
yeah.
so many other things I wanted to ask you, but this has gone by really quickly. I really appreciate your time and just being sharing about your faith journey. It's super interesting to me. So I hope it's of value to somebody, one
Yeah.
listener out there. It'll be worthwhile. And yeah, thank you, Brent. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Happy to come back on anytime. That was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It was worth it to miss all of my family's events and my kids growing up. It was worth, not maintaining friendships. Like it was worth all of it. But the truth is, none of them actually would also say that they set out to do any of those things. Those were just byproducts of focusing and just empire building and chasing status and kind of trying to be really great in one thing.